You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good, good. Hey, was thinking that maybe we should just do a full episode of lighter note questions.
I would
So,
totally do that.
Jeff, if you were a potato, no, the lighter note question. So, one thing people don't know is like normally we set up the lighter note question, don't tell the guest about it until kind of pretty pretty early in getting ready to start recording. So they have half an hour, 45 minutes to think about it at least. But you have been the proponent of like total shock value, right? Like, let's wait until we pull the trigger on the question. So I'm going to try it on you, and I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite Halloween candy?
Favorite Halloween candies? I guess it depends, right? If you're in a wealthy neighborhood and they're giving away full-on candy bars, as most people should be doing, I would say either a full Snickers bar or a Twix bar would be my poison of choice. Um, Definitely, I tell you what's definitely not is those stupid foam peanut things that are just garbage. If you're giving those away, you hate children. I'm just going to go out
I'm
there
talking
and
about
put that
circus
position.
peanuts.
Those are disgusting. I'm sorry, but
Oh,
that is
yeah,
the wrong way
and
to
candy
approach life.
corns.
I don't
Candy
mind
corns
candy
are
corns.
disgusting.
So
Ugh.
candy corns have a special place in the Stebbin household because I use them to explain NFL offenses and defenses to my wife. So I've used them to explain the 4-3 defense, the 3-4 defense, nickel, dime, what positions. And if you've got a really good set of candy corn that has the big fat pumpkins versus the little triangles, now you can get really meticulous with who's the offensive line, who's the defensive line, stuff like that. So I don't necessarily mind those, but I definitely will not go anything that's like those foam peanut stuff or licorice. That's gross too.
Wow. See, this is what's great about the Identity at the Center podcast is like for folks to kind of get to know us because I was talking to somebody who was a fan of the show and he was telling me that his favorite one of his favorite memories of the show was your story about when you worked at Chili's and you delivered the sandwich, which was the Buffalo Ranch, and your guest said, "Well, there's no ranch on my sandwich," and you just made up that the ranch powder or flavoring was baked in. Like
Yeah,
that's really getting to know Jeff Sedman.
that's okay. I mean, that makes me sound really crappy. And let's be honest, right? I would have guessed I would have been 18 or 19, I guess. Not necessarily at the pinnacle of quality individual that you see today before you, but I just didn't care. And, you know, I should I have done it? No. Does it make for a good story? I think so.
Okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, the correct answer on Halloween candy is peanut butter cups. But
Ugh.
that's just an aside. Oh
See, now
yeah,
I
oh
don't
yeah.
like peanut butter, but I love Snickers and peanuts. Like I don't have a problem with that. Just whatever it is, peanut butter. No, that's not my jam.
Wow. So, and then my other realization today is that everybody is in meetings all day. So
Mm.
I actually think this whole work from home thing, some companies are probably in a rush to get people back in. But to me, it's like I've never worked this hard before. You don't have the water cooler or people bumping into you in the hallway. So it's literally go from meeting to meeting. So productivity is kind of off the charts.
Yeah, it can be challenging. I think this is where you own your own schedule, and for the most part, I mean, not everyone has that luxury. But if you need to schedule time to do work and block it on a calendar, I'll do it. I mean, just because you have an open slot of availability for someone to try to put a meeting on there, unless they are the right person or there's something on fire, doesn't mean you really have to kind of accept that meeting. I think workers should feel empowered to manage their own schedules as long as work's getting done. I think that's kind of how you and I have worked over the years. Is hey, you know what? We have a job to do. We'll get it done. If that means we work at midnight one night, so be it. If it means I'm taking, if you or I are taking naps at noon, I know you're the nap expert, hinting back at a previous show, but so be it too. I think there's a yin and a yang, a balance, whatever it may be. But I'm a firm believer that people own their own schedules, and within reason, should be able to, block off working time, focus time, whatever you want to call it, to get stuff done, and not be afraid to say no. I'm just not available at that point, because every time you don't say that, then it becomes yes, I'm available. Yes, I'm available. The work's not getting done. So guess what that means? Your day just got longer. Your weekend just got shorter. Whatever it looks like, to actually get the real work done. So that's why I'm not a fan of meetings and not a fan of bureaucracy, especially the old sign where it's like, this meeting could have been an email. I hate wasting time like that. So, for the people out there who are in leadership positions, think about that. Be succinct, be brief, and be cognizant, I guess, of the work actually needing to get done. And at some point, you have to stop talking and start doing. And hopefully, people get that, which I think most do.
So Jeff, I think we should have an end on a ledger note episode. It shouldn't be today, right? We've got an awesome guest, but maybe maybe record something over the Christmas break so that it's when nobody's listening anyway. And if they really want to hear, what makes us tick, they can do it then. But I am interested to hear from our guests what is the best Halloween candy.
Yeah, why don't we bring him on the show? Today we've got Andrew Chanthaphone. He's a manager with Edgile's Identity Service Line. It's his first time appearing on with us, so we're going to get right into it. But welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And I know you're a listener, and you've sent in some questions in the past that we've hopefully tried to address as we can. But I think the most important pressing question right now is the question that Jim proposed around favorite Halloween candy.
I love Reese's Pieces. That's my favorite Halloween candy. And then the worst are any of those like taffy ones that stick to your teeth. Those are the worst. Again, if you want to be mean, either that or you give me those bags full of pennies. Please don't. Those are the worst.
I don't know why would you give away pennies, something that you can throw at a car and chip paint with? That just doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm outnumbered here on the peanut butter thing, so it sounds like I've got some audio editing to do here to make it sound like I won. But we'll skip back past that for right now. Andrew, you've been in the identity space for a little bit. Just so we can kind of get familiar with your background and kind of what your viewpoint is, can you tell us a little bit about your identity origin story? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
Oh, 100% chose me, just like a lot of your guests in the past. I fell into my accident. So I came from a tester, business analyst background doing financial software. I switched positions and I got hired to a position, and they're like, hey, you're a good BA. Here's SailPoint. Go learn it. And I'm like, what's SailPoint? How'd you learn this? And they're like, oh, YouTube, here's some docs. And I learned what SailPoint was, what identity access management was, basically what cybersecurity was, because I had no idea at the time what it was. And that's where I got into it. And what was blessed with was I got some mentors that took me under the wing and taught me IAM. Why do we do it this way? How can we ask the questions with our customers this way? And I just fell in love with it from that point on. And then this was maybe in 2014. Then from that point on, Jeff and Jim, I've been on these amazing projects with IAM, and I've just been loving everything about the whole space, and everything that you guys do in your podcast has been very helpful for me. So that's where my origin story is. I fell into my accent, love what's going on, and I'm just happy to just continue to be doing this work.
I find it interesting that you come from kind of the business side of things. And I think this is something that I've kind of pointed out in the past, is that there is plenty of space for identity professionals of all sorts, right? Not everyone is a programmer, coder, technology. There are plenty of things to do in identity that really you don't need to be super technical on. Obviously, you've got to understand concepts and kind of how they all fit together, but it's encouraging to find another brother out there who is, not on the technical side, but certainly coming more from the business aspect of it, which is just as important as the technical side. I know you also do some work with the cybersecurity nonprofit. People might not be familiar with that organization. I guess real briefly, can you kind of tell us about that org and what you've been able to contribute towards it?
Yeah, Jeff. So it's funny. I actually heard of CSNP from one of your older guests, Paul Lenzini was on, and he's a board member of it. And when I listened to your podcast, I'm like, you know what? I want to get back too. So I looked into this organization, and really, it's amazing. They're a nonprofit, and their goal is to provide cybersecurity education for free. Right? It's more inclusive, more accessible, and the biggest goal for them is more for women and minorities, right? And that's something that they're really striving to do, is to get more diversity right into the cybersecurity space from that perspective. They offer amazing array of videos. So they have monthly sizzle webinars that they have sizzles come in and talk about their job, how they got there, almost similar to what you guys talk about today in your podcast. And then they also have these weekly webinars where they have different facets of cybersecurity that talk about, so like pen testing, for example, how to use Wireshark to get people, and then also these, how do I do certifications, or how do I get a job from my couch, for example, in cybersecurity. So they have these various different webinars that kind of teach people all about cybersecurity and get them interested from that perspective. Um, so that's really a background about what CSNP is. What I did for them was I noticed they didn't have a IAM 101 webinar. So I'm like, you know what? I would love to do one for you guys to get this out there. I think IAM is not the most sexy name when it comes to cybersecurity. Everybody talks about cybersecurity like, oh yeah, pen testing. Oh yeah, ethical hacking. That's so cool. Or network intrusion. But I want to tell people, IAM is just as cool. Just like you guys in your identity at the center, everything builds around identity, and I use that platform to kind of educate people on IAM, the different building blocks of IAM, and what I got was, wow, you know what, this sounds kind of cool. Oh man, that's great. I didn't know I'd be so technical. I don't have to be technical to do this. Tell me more. And that's the whole point of that whole webinar, was to get people to understand what we do and say, you know what, we want you to come try this too.
Hey Jeff, I have an idea. I think if we made this a video podcast, we could prove that IAM is sexy. What do you think?
Are you talking about some sort of deep fake technology or something? Because I
No,
think that's the only way that's happening, at least for
I
this
thought this
video.
I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to use one of your buttons, like wah, wah, wah.
Oh, well, I didn't have it queued up, but here, let me play it in post-mortem for you.
That was wonderful. I loved it. Um, Andrew, I think one of the cool things about the CSNP story and kind of how it ties back to the podcast, when we have heard from our great loyal listening fan base. Um, we have people who are at different points in the spectrum, people who are new to IAM or wanting to get into IAM, all the way out to kind of industry veterans. And so CSNP also provides an opportunity for the industry veteran to give back. I think that's I think that's so important to hear from our guests and other folks that I interact with in the industry, and people want to have the way to pay it forward, and I guess that's an opportunity that you saw as well.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Like I said in my origin story, I was blessed to have these mentors that took their time to teach me IAM and give me the background that I didn't have at the time, right? I came from financial background. So for me, it's always giving back. And, I used to coach lacrosse when I was, a lot younger, before kids. It's the coaching me to give back. And I saw as a great opportunity to not only give back to, our community, but also spread IAM to more masses that maybe haven't heard about it from that perspective too. So absolutely what you said, Jim, was how do I give back and get more people to even consider IAM and to see if there's something that they want to do.
I mean, there's a huge skills gap in cybersecurity and specifically in identity and access management. Um, you're doing a lot to help people get into the space through, what you talked about there with your IAM 101, which sounds really great. You're also doing a YouTube channel. Um, so kind of give us an idea of, what people can get from that YouTube channel. And I'm also thinking again, like, you know, maybe you can attack it from the standpoint of who might want to go out there and learn from the YouTube channel, but also if there are folks like you who want to give back, how can they kind of follow that same model and would you recommend it?
Absolutely, Jim. So my YouTube channel, I just started recently. It's called All Things I Am. I started with that name, but essentially, it's the same thing I just said, Jim. Is really I wanted my focus on my channel is to help people understand I am, right. So think of it more of the audience of beginners, people who want to transition into IAM that have thought about it. And then also, I thought maybe as a option is companies who hire entry level, entry level users or new employees that maybe don't have the time to teach them IAM. Hey, you know what? Here's a YouTube channel that you can go and watch that gives you a better background about what IAM is to get them up to speed. So those are really my hope of my YouTube channel, I'm also want to help you with career transitioning. So obviously my goal is also helping with resume writing for the cybersecurity jobs, right? I know a lot of people have that struggle today of how do I really, have my resume show in terms of, since I don't have experience, how do I show it, not on paper, but exactly what I know the concepts are. And then also interviewing tips, right? I want to make sure that I help people when they interview for jobs that maybe don't have the experience on it, that they can reflect that with the understanding of concepts like, I know what RBAC is. I may not show on paper, but let me show you what it is and maybe give you an idea of how do I show that, right? That's really what my channel is really to help people is to focus on helping beginners or people who want to transition to cybersecurity have a way to get the understanding, the knowledge, and then build upon that to hopefully come and transition into our industry.
So my hat's off to anyone who starts anything to give back to the community at large. So definitely kudos to you, Andrew, for starting that channel and getting content out there. I know you've got one video out. Is there anything that you can kind of tease as something that you have ideas for the future of? What are some of the topics that you think you might be addressing as part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm trying to focus on the basics, right? Just the simple basics, just so everybody has a good foundation. So I did the first video, like you said, Jeff, was the 101. The next couple of videos are about authentication. So I want to break that down. So the next video coming up, which I'm hoping to finalize editing because editing is so hard. What I've learned of this is editing. So I love the stuff that you do for this and editing. I totally understand where you're coming from. But so username passwords, a little bit just about that. I want to talk about physical tokens and of course biometrics, give people understanding about that. I'm going to pivot to authentication. We'll talk about RBAC, ABAC, and even some PBAC, which is something that's new to me. So I'm excited to learn and kind of talk more about that. That's something that I think not many people talk more about a PBAC, and how that's being used. And then I want to pivot once I get the basics done, right, and help them out. That's where I want to pivot more into maybe a day in life, what I do, and then of course the resume career stuff. So that's kind of the idea approach of how I want to get things comes for this channel is teach IAM from a basic perspective, and then once you get the understanding, and I also want to talk about organizations and media like you guys, right, your podcast to give you more avenues to go and find training videos or anything to educate you further from my channel. And then let's talk about career transition and how do I get you there afterwards.
Yeah, Jim and I are big fans of YouTube, and we learn a lot just from things that have been put out there by the community at large. So I'm looking forward to following along and following the journey and see how it comes along. I think this is also a great spot where it's a very empowered job seeker climate right now. Right, we're seeing a lot of upheaval in organizations with not having enough talent, specifically in the identity space, is very hot right now, and this is a great opportunity, I think, for people who maybe aren't in identity but are looking to transition into that, where stuff like this kind of help them. I'm curious from your perspective, and as you've been talking with folks, what's the biggest hurdle that you see for people who are looking to transition over from maybe another area, and maybe it's not even IT, maybe it's something else, like your background, um, into the IAM space. What are some of the hurdles that you've seen that people should start to think about how they're going to overcome to make that successful transition?
There are YouTube channels and videos out there on IAM, but I noticed that they're very technical or very in the weeds, right? And I felt like when I talked to people on the IAM 101 was it's too much, right? Like they needed more of a higher 10 foot ceiling type of approach, right? And that was the reason why I wanted to start the channel was to give them just a gist, right? Let me talk to you in a more plain English, right, from that perspective of how things work. And to me, those were the biggest things that I've heard of was number one was I don't really understand what RBAC is. Can you tell me in more simple fashion what the whole point of that was? I got a lot of that from the feedback. The second thing is people are afraid that they don't have the experience, right? How do I show like an organization that I know this, even though I don't have it on paper, how do I show that maybe when I talk to them? That to me is the second big thing. And the third thing to me is more or less where do I go to find stuff, right? The first thing that people ask me is, oh, what certification do I need to get? I'm like, no, don't need certifications. Guess what? Plenty of amazing free resources out there. Let me show you where to go to, right? And I think with our industry so flooded, cybersecurity industry, with so many boot camps, so many different courses, and to comes to offer stuff, right? I think that's the first thing that they think of is, oh, how do I get my Security Plus or my Network Plus or CISP from? And I'm like, wait, slow down. Let's find some more free stuff and understand the concepts first, and then let's talk about certifications. So to me, I think those were the biggest hurdles that I've noticed, and I've seen too in our space today when it comes to IAM, of people that want to transition into our space or looking to transition into our space.
I think one of the best avenues for somebody who's on the business side to transition into IAM is in the area of project management, business analyst, um, and so I know that's the role that you are in, and kind of probably the experience you're speaking from. One of the things that I found to be the biggest hurdles to a successful IAM project or program over time is, proper expectation setting, gathering of requirements that you can hand off to the engineers. Um, what are your thoughts on this? Like, what is the level of importance of that? And do you think that, because my feeling is like, I didn't start off in IAM. None of us started off in IAM. IAM kind of found us. But if you're the kind of person who has the ability to kind of organize things and manage projects, and right, and then there are some technical skills to managing projects, but if you're kind of wired that way, you can do it in the IAM space.
Yeah, you're gonna laugh at this, or people might laugh at this, but to me, communication is the key to all successful projects. The biggest things I've seen in terms of in my experience is that can the stakeholder understand what I'm talking about from a civic level, but then can my team understand also from that perspective? So I think when it comes to expectations and requirements, to me, it's can I communicate this properly to people, right? Can my CISO, who maybe has no idea what's going on, or maybe the CEO, right, that, hey, we want to use multi-factor authentication and not use passwords because, Jeff loves passwords. From that perspective, how do I say it to him in a simple level, but then turn to my developer and say, hey, guess what? We're going to implement MFA, maybe RSA tokens or one-time passwords from that perspective, and make sure that everybody's cohesive. Because when you don't have the communications in terms of that, I think the requirements just gets lost, right? You have people who either hold back that they want to give you, they want to open up to what you want to help, they want to be helpful for you, and then the expectation gets lost because again, if you're miscommunicating, things get lost in the shuffle, from that perspective. So I think from that perspective is where it's key for the biggest hurdle, in my opinion, when it comes to a successful project.
Yeah, and you can't talk about project management in technology or IAM specifically without getting into the debate of waterfall versus agile. So I'm just wondering where you come down on this. And yeah, it talk about a trap question. But yeah, I'm just going to throw it out there. Where do you fall down on this? What are you into?
Oh man, I'm ready for some hate mail, but I'm a fan of agile when it comes to IAM projects or just in general, right? I know some people hate it. Some people think agile is meetings have meetings have meetings, from that perspective. But to me, I look at agile as, we have a understanding of what we can do from a tangible perspective. We are producing into production sooner rather than later, right? So the analogy I like to use is if you're getting fired tomorrow, what can I show that we have done from that perspective, right? And we're not so bogged down in terms of requirements. I understand the fact that requirements can change, but if you have a strong enough backlog in terms of requirements or user stories as we call it in agile, I think you're effective as long as the communication between you and the project management team on their side or the product owner as they call it in agile is good, right, from that perspective. I came from a waterfall background, just for everybody's awareness. Again, I've been a BA for about 14 years now. So I know all the fun stuff about waterfall. The problem I have with waterfall is um, it's sequential, right? You have to do, kickoff first, requirements second, and we can't start development until requirements are done and signed off. And then you prototype, and then you design, you test. What if something changes or we miss something that's so critical? And then we use the favorite words of our industry, change requests, right? People love change requests, which cost money, and then kind of gets upset about that. So that's why I'm more of an agile, because if things change, you can just adjust accordingly. I'm not making it easy for everybody. Please don't think it is easy, but you can adjust accordingly, and then hopefully stay within your means of your project plan, if that makes sense, or the length of your SOW from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I came from a waterfall background as well. I kind of apply here's the debate honestly is the folks who are in the agile camp kind of see waterfall as like plan and eventually get around to actually having something. Folks who are in the waterfall camp kind of criticizing agile is, and truly you see this where from a developer standpoint, some organizations or some developers kind of look at like, yeah, we love agile because it's a chance to kick the project manager out and just start building and start doing the fun stuff right away. We don't have to sit in meetings and write everything down, and um, which that's a very sloppy way of looking at agile. If you run agile according to the Scrum methodology, it is much more structured than what I just gave it credit for. I'd apply this thinking though to like if you wanted to build a nice house, right? If you wanted to build a really big house, if you went the waterfall model, you kind of sketch out like this is what we want the house to look like in the end. Whereas if you went kind of that agile model, you build something that you could move into as quickly as possible, and then you start adding on to it to get to where you want. The end product is probably going to look quite different. So
Mhm.
now who do you think is going to get the hate mail? So,
Yeah, no, no,
but
no, no,
before
no.
we move on, I wanted to see what is Jeff's opinion on this.
I don't care. As long as stuff gets done. I mean, I think I I'm not a fan of bureaucracy and slowing things down. So whatever's the most efficient path is the way forward that I would prefer. I think I would defer to the project management and the team and get out of their way and say, here's what needs to be done. I'm less on the project management side and more on the strategy, I guess, and direction side of things and say, okay, here's what we need to get done. What do you need to have this happen? If they want to use waterfall, great. If they want to use agile, great. If they want to use some other methodology, fine, right? I'm more concerned, me personally, with outcomes than trying to manage by a specific letter of the law or project methodology or anything like that.
Right. So, Andrew, in terms of the types of projects that you've been working on, right? You've worked on IGA implementations, privileged access management implementations. Is the approach still the same? Is it going through that same kind of requirements and project methodology? Is it mostly the same or are they like wildly different?
I think they're similar for the most part because more or less the engagement, the requirements are similar. I think what the big difference between IGA and PAM deployments is who you're talking to, right? And what are the more rules around that? So, for example, right in your IGA, right, or your identity governance, applications administration, excuse me, those people, it's more like your HR people, right, your external people who maybe aren't so invested. All they care about is, hey, how does my person get from their authoritative source down to whatever system you're doing, and then when it goes down to their emails are created, or when they're in Active Directory, for example, or AD, they're there, right? Or if I move jobs or move positions, or if I leave, right? Tell me that from that perspective. IGA has more of an external feel, in my opinion, but in terms of PAM, to me, those are your OS teams, your database teams, your app teams, who may not be so receptive sometimes to what you're doing because you're almost changing people's like work, right? Like, how does it affect me, right? From that perspective, and it's a lot behind the scenes, right? Because and you also have some other, specific. You may have SOX compliance with that, right? Or you have encryption, or I'm sorry, not encryption, excuse me. You have other things you have to worry about, such as I think you guys said this in a older podcast with older one of your guests is, what if it goes down, right? I think the person from Adobe said that. What do you do, right, from that perspective? So I feel like in terms of the engagements are different in the way you communicate what you're trying to do, but the outcomes and the way you get requirements to me are the same.
Do you find any difference in project duration between the two? Because I feel like IGA tend to be a little bit longer cycles because of the impact on the business and that more customer facing. And the customer might be internal customer, meaning other workers, right? Or it could be truly customer. I guess in my experience, I find that IGA tends to take longer, if you consider all of the tools and capabilities that an IGA platform might have versus privilege access management, but maybe you've seen different. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I'm the same boat as you, Jeff. Most of my projects, the IGA is lot more longer than a PAM deployment. I think PAM, a lot of those owners have they have it in play, right? They know exactly what the admin level should be, what it needs to be. Just for them, it's like, okay, tell me the application, tell me what your policies, like rotation policies, or how that tunnel works. Let's say, for example, if you use Cyberark, for example, and tell me how that all works, right? In that perspective, I think because they have all thought out. I think HR, it's a shift for them, right? And the IGA perspective, there's so many different ways that their old processes today and their new processes. I think that's where the time crunch, or I'm sorry, the time gets so much longer, is that as HR or even other app owners trying to understand the change, because for some people don't know, change is a bad word for a lot of people. From that perspective, is understanding how's this going to affect me, how am I going to teach that to people? Where I think in the PAM people or the database owners and all those people, they kind of get it, right? Because they're technical and they understand the whole concept of it. It's more just what happens if this goes down, or how do I, get this password in and out from that perspective. That's my experience, what I've seen, or the reason why IGA deployments are so much more longer than PAM deployments.
One of the things that I constantly get asked about from the folks that we work with are, should the system be clean before we start? Should we use the system to clean the system as we go along, right? Bad data in, bad data out, right? That kind of thing. And I know Jim and I will bounce back and forth, depending on the client and kind of what the goal is. What's been your experience when it comes to, um, if let's say you don't have a very clean environment right now. Maybe you have a poor structure of AD groups, bad names, no ownership, you know, empty groups, nested groups, all kinds of bad stuff that can really not be optimal for an IGA deployment. How much time do you think customers of those types of solutions should spend cleaning up before implementing an IGA tool? Or do you fall more on the side of using the IGA tool to help with the cleanup of some of that type of burden?
I am under the camp of clean my data right beforehand. I know that can be time consuming, but for me is when I test, right, when we test our platform, right, I want to make sure the data is clean, because if not, I'm not going to find the problems when we start to deploy, our product, or we're testing, right? Because we're not going to know what's going to happen. And then, but if I have bad data, for example, and I start to test that, I might say, oh, that's working. But in reality, once you maybe have more clean set of people, for example, that's when things start to come up and bugs start to come up. So I feel the approach is, best we can, clean as much as we can. Now, that's not always true for some customers. So if that's the case, my approach is always, let's pick and choose a pilot group, right? And let's use them to clean first. And let me show you what looks like clean versus, not clean data. And then let the customer saying, here's why we need to have clean data. What are your thoughts? And I go from there. But that's just my opinion.
So I'm sure you've got some real horror stories of going through IAM projects and maybe things that maybe not have gone the way that they may have been anticipated or planned, right? Without naming and shaming, for folks who are listening out there, when it comes to deploying IAM, and it could be anything, right? IGA, PAM, whatever example you want to use. What are some of the things that you've seen out there as like, wow, that really should have gone differently, and is maybe a lesson learned that folks listening out there can kind of take away and keep an eye out for when they get around to doing their own deployments?
Absolutely. So the one thing that came to mind, it goes back to my communication, is we went on a site to a customer and I was pitching the whole project to them. Like, this is what we're doing, right? And the team looks at me and go, why are you here? I'm like, wait, excuse me? And they had no idea the whole point of why we're here. The fact that we communicated this 6, 7, or 8 times that, hey, we're coming to deploy this IGA solution for you. They stopped me midstream, was like, well, we like ours already. We don't need you to come here. You should just go home. And we were contracted already to do this work. So that was, to me, one of the biggest struggles, was to help educate them, and to, it's really just tooth and nail, say, you know what, here's why this is the value of this system. That was a big horror story for us, is really understanding the whole project and really understanding and make sure, hey, is this exactly what we want to do from that perspective before we jumped in there to get started. That's one. The second one, real quick, is we had a scope project where the team that scoped it didn't know the full complexity of their role management software already. So when I got in there, I asked questions like, so tell me more about your role management system. They're like, oh, I have entitlement owners, I have role owners. They could be either or both. And I go, so how many roles comments do you guys have? A couple million. And I'm like, wait, I was told a couple thousand. And that was that. Jim and Jeff. I think this is where I got that question to ask you guys about role mining came from was how do I approach this from an user perspective rather than a top-down bottom analysis, which took me 2.5 months of Excel and database work to figure out how to underweave all that and figure out who goes to what and what should be considered a role. So do you do your due diligence, people, is I guess my big horror story about what is, and ask the right questions before you get in there, because I didn't and we didn't, excuse me, and that's what caused a lot of horror shows from our side in terms of deployments or projects.
So, Andrew, I want to ask you about some of your go-to tips or go-to best practices. I've got a couple in my hip pocket. When I think about IGA, I think the basic, most fundamental component of a good IAM program is that you have to have one place to go to know who has access to what. I think when I talk about privilege access management, it's don't try to do privilege access management to people, right? Get them involved. Make sure that they buy into the process, because every PAM project I've seen fail, it's where the IAM or IT team or information security tries to force this process on their system administrators without getting them to kind of own the process. I think, if I'm thinking more cutting edge, but it's really not even cutting edge anymore. It's just becoming a paradigm of our industry is zero trust, right? You can't think of the firewall as like this holy grail mitigating control, like, oh, we don't have to do a good job securing our internal systems because we have a firewall. All the bad guys are on the outside. That is bad thinking on so many levels, and we're not going to dedicate the episode to this, but I wanted to kind of turn that back to you. Do you have any kind of holy grail or go-to tips or best practices that you can share with the audience?
Absolutely, Jim. The first thing I think for everybody is number one, really understand your customer problems, right? I think it's the first thing. I feel like a lot of people come in, they're like, I got this shiny product. So I know we're vendor agnostic, but like I have this sell point product. It's great for you. Woo! From that perspective, we're not understanding the problem of the customer first, right? I think the first thing is, what's your problem? How can we help you first? And then let's talk about products, right, or solutions. I think you guys do that with your practice. To me, I always feel that's the first thing that you should really understand, because to me that level sets you and the customer, right? You guys have a firm understanding of what the problem is, and then you guys are working together in tandem to try to fix that problem. The second thing is understand the budget. You guys have talked about in the past in your podcast, is not everybody can afford like a sell point. Maybe there's like an Omada, for example, or another platform out there that fits the customer budget. I think that's another way. Another thing to me is that's the second thing. And the third part is I don't think people talk about it a lot. And Jim, this goes to the agile way, but it's you really understand what's the definition of done for a customer, right? I don't think we ask that question a lot to customers, right? What is it after I'm done? What is done to you? Like, you give me the milestones or the tip, right? I ask that a lot to my customers. Like, hey, great, we're doing this, migration to, from, let's just say, Workday to SailPoint, for example. You can tell I'm a SailPoint person, um, uh, from that perspective. But what's your definition of done? Like, is it just doing the connector? Is it doing something else? Is it creating a connector, then downstreaming downwards to Active Directory and have an account show back up? Like, that to me is where when you go back down to say, okay, are we done with our project? The definition of done helps check that off, and it's agreement again between you and the customer. So there's no problems at the end when we're leaving the project to say, hey, we fulfilled the contract, and not everybody go, excuse me, you haven't done X, Y, and Z yet. Which will leave a lot of awkward silences or awkward conversations afterwards.
Yeah, I think the first one you mentioned is really the one that I find the most important, is really understanding the problem you're trying to solve. Um, there's so many times that there's a lot of solutions being made that are band-aids to cover up something, when if someone just took a step back and said, why are we doing it this way? Like, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't strategic. This isn't where we want to be in 3, 4, 5 years. I think having, the courage, the fortitude, the will, whatever terminology you want to use, to take a step back and say, is this the right thing for the strategy going forward? Does it make sense? Doesn't mean that you don't do it, but at least you're walking into it with open eyes and saying, hey, you know what? This potentially could be throwaway work. we've got to do it because timelines or business need or whatever it may be. But if there's an opportunity to have a strategy going forward and say, how do we not do that double work, not do that throwaway work, and really kind of have strategic solutions in place, I think organizations would be a lot better off. I'd probably be out of a job, but I'm okay with that. I think overall the security world would be better for it. I can always go back to waiting tables, I guess, if I needed to. I wouldn't be very good at it at this point, but it is what it is. We spent a lot of time here talking through, I think, really kind of a few different topics, right? Getting into the IAM space, kind of making that transition, and then some things to think about when it comes to project management within the IAM space. What are some things that can kind of go right and go wrong from an IAM perspective when you're doing deployments? But I want to bring it up a level, start to swim back to the surface as is my terrible segue. And one of the things that Jim talked about earlier is we try to end on a lighter note. And one of the things that we discussed with Andrew, and Jim and I are huge fans of this, is the movie Office Space. So not everyone has seen this, and I think that should be the first part of any identity and access management strategy, is to go watch Office Space, the movie. It is several years old at this point. I don't remember when, but I want to say early 2000s or maybe late 90s. I don't remember. But it is a classic of American cinema that everyone should be aware of. And what I'd like to do is ask Andrew, what is your favorite Office Space scene or quote? And then maybe I might have an audio clip to play along with it.
I love Office Space. So my actual favorite quote, I can't say on this podcast. It's family friendly, but just let's just say it has to do with Lawrence, right? He is by far one of the funniest characters in that whole movie, but Lawrence is my favorite quote. My favorite scene is when he's in the room with the two Bobs, and then they ask him the question of, what do you do? What's the motivation? He's like, well, Bob, I have 8 managers. And they're like, 8 managers? To me, that's like because it's, I've been there. I'll put it that way. I've been there, not with 8 managers, but I've been there. So it always makes me laugh when I see that movie and see that scene, because I'm like, I've been there.
I have 8 different bosses right now.
I beg your pardon?
8 bosses.
8?
8, Bob. So that means that when I make a mistake, I have 8 different people coming by to tell me about it. That's my only real motivation, is not to be hassled. That and the fear of losing my job. But Bob, that'll only make someone work just hard enough not to get fired.
I think Hypnotized Peter is probably one of the most insightful characters ever in the business world, and that more people should be like that. Jim, what about yourself?
Well, 8 managers, I mean, come on, that's the beauty of the matrix organization, right? That's the nice way to put it. And I agree, Andrew. I'm glad you didn't use the Lawrence quote, because I'm pretty sure every quote from that movie from Lawrence is unplayable in our podcast. But Jeff, if you would allow me, I will. I mean, we've now hit on a subject I'm very passionate about, which is the movie Office Space. So, favorite quote comes from the Bobs. And by the way, I've been on an advisory engagement and had people sitting across the table from me who were laughing. And what's so funny? Well, we're just thinking that you guys are like the Bobs. And it's like, that's really a compliment. Thank you.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but yeah.
Yeah. But my favorite quote comes from Bob number 1, I guess, or Bob number 2. And what would you say you do here?
What would you say you do here?
I think I even had the timing right? So that's my favorite quote. My favorite scene is the PC load letter beatdown scene.
Yeah, so that one is, I was going to play a clip for that, but it's really just music, and we'll probably get a DMCA strike on that. And it's really just baseball bats going against the printer, which is a classic in itself. But I think there's a scene earlier in the movie that sets it up where you hear Michael Bolton really start to get frustrated with the printer. So here's that clip.
Point of the exercise is that you're supposed to figure out what you would want to do. If PC load letter, what the f does that mean?
All right, so I had to beep that one a little bit, but PC load letter, what does that mean? That's classic right there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, and then they take the printer out, and to a Ghetto Boys tune, they beat the living snot out of the printer. And the best scene is when Michael Bolton runs back to beat it down some more. It's like a scene from a gangster movie, right? He
Mhm.
runs out and he rips the ribbon cable out of the printer, and it looks like it's like, he's ripping like body parts out of this thing. I mean, it is absolutely hilarious. But now, Jeff, what is your favorite?
It's such a classic movie, and there's so many good scenes in it. I love the ones you've got there. There's of course the jump to conclusions, Matt. There are two lines from that movie that I use all the time. The first is when somebody asks me what I did over the weekend, and my favorite response is I did nothing, and it was everything that I hoped it could be.
I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing, and it was everything that I thought it could be.
And the other one I use is, especially I like to use this internally when we're talking about projects and people who are doing a good job and maybe looking to climb the career ladder, that sort of thing. I love to call them straight shooters with upper management written all over them.
That's just a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
So I love those two quotes, and I think the scenes are great, but I absolutely use those the most often still to this day, as much as possible whenever I can. So those are definitely my favorites. All right, I think we successfully breached the surface and are now maybe swimming down some other river that we probably don't want to get to. I think this is definitely the lighter note show that that we might do later this year, maybe around Christmas time, when like Jim said, nobody's probably listening anyway. We can probably let loose a little bit. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. But before we go, I want to pass it around one more time. Let Andrew kind of get his final thoughts out there as far as what should people taking away from this type of conversation if they're looking to make the change over into the identity space. Any words of wisdom that you want to impart upon the listening audience, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. Just quick couple of things, right? Number one is don't be afraid, be vulnerable, right? Get out there, mentor, LinkedIn somebody, ask questions, join meetups. They're great. Even conferences, right? Go and listen to what people are talking about from that perspective, or ask somebody who's been in the space. Hey, you know what? How do I get started? Right? That's the first step. Is be open to that. The second last one I always use in some of my YouTube videos is going to be just be curious, right? You never know, right? Ask the questions, or just, man, what does zero trust mean? What does MFA mean, right? Be curious and do some work to see what that is. Because I think the more and more you look to think about it, be curious, the more you like, no, wow, this is kind of cool. Maybe I want to do this too. So those are my imparting words for people taking out this, or people want to transition into IAM. Those two things I think would help you really, really well in getting into the industry.
No, that's good tips. Jim, how about yourself? Any final thoughts for this week?
I just want to give a shout out to Andrew. I think what you're doing in terms of kind of giving back is spot on, right on the money. I feel like we all kind of come from the standpoint of like, I'll be able to do that when I achieve like some next level. Like I don't know enough right now. The thing is, you know more than most people, right? And you have plenty to give back. And when I say that, I'm not talking to you directly, Andrew. I'm talking about the folks who are listening on the phone now. I remember when I was in my first job out of college, and I was probably a year and a half out of college. And at the office I was working at, we had a computer consultant. And he said to me, you should really start your own consulting firm. You could just go out there and do computer consulting. And I was thinking, oh man, it's like, I just don't have the skills. I don't know what I'm doing. I look back on this and he was right. I knew more than most people knew about computers, and I really should have believed in myself. And I think what we all should do, everybody who's listening should think about how they could be giving back, how they can be paying it forward for the next generation of people who are going to be filling the shoes that you're in today, and look for ways to give back. I mean, for Jeff and I, it's a lot of it's this podcast. We're also speaking at conferences and things like that. I just think it's a very important thing to do.
Yeah, I like the idea. I mean, and the give back can be any number of shapes or forms, right? Even if it's not public and you're really taking care of your own internal organization, if you're an IAM leader within your org, get your folks trained up on your products, show them the way, develop a path for them to get smarter. It's going to make your job a lot easier, and help out the overall IAM program from a maturity standpoint. So even if it's not public, back to sort of the IAM community at large, think about the folks who are part of your teams and making sure that they have the tools and the skills necessary to enable your success. If you're at a management level or a director level or whatever leadership position you're in, I think that's something that often gets overlooked. And I'll credit a former coworker of mine and current CISO, Bert. One of his things is whenever we bought IAM technology was include training on that technology as part of the purchase, so that they weren't buying technology that they didn't have trained resources for. Send people to training, send people to conferences, help people get smarter. It's going to make your life a lot easier going forward. So I guess, I'm echoing that as well. Okay, so I think that's pretty good for final thoughts. We'll have a bunch of links in the show notes. We'll have Andrew's LinkedIn profile so people can reach out to him and connect directly. And definitely Andrew's YouTube channel, All Things IAM, as well as the CSNP webinar that he gave around IAM 101. So look for those in the show notes. And I'm sure if you ping Andrew on LinkedIn, he'll be happy to provide those links as well. Jim and I are going to be at Authenticate 2021 in Seattle in the coming weeks here. So hopefully we'll see folks out there. I think Andrew mentioned he's got a virtual ticket, so he can, I guess, wave or do whatever it is when Jim and I are presenting out there. And we're hoping to actually get some podcasts done while out there with some folks that we might have had already on the show, or maybe new people to the Identity Center podcast. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. You'll be able to learn more about the show at identityatthecenter.com on the web. And then you can always find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. So with that, appreciate everyone listening. And we're going to go ahead and leave it there. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.